I fell in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, and the first person who found me wasn't my son. It wasn't my daughter-in-law. It was my neighbor, Patrice, who had a key because I watered her plants when she traveled, and who had noticed my car hadn't moved in 2 days. The paramedics said I'd had a stroke, a significant one. They used words like time-sensitive and lucky she was found when she was, and you're going to need someone with you. I heard all of it through a fog, lying on a gurney in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, an oxygen tube pressed under my nose. What I remember most clearly from those first hours is not the pain in my left side, not the fear, not even the sterile brightness of the emergency room ceiling. What I remember is asking the nurse, "Has anyone reached my son?" and watching her face do something careful and quiet before she said, "We're still trying." They tried for 4 days. 52 calls to his number, 19 to his wife's, 14 messages left on voicemail, emails sent to 2 addresses. The hospital had my emergency contact on file. His name was the first one listed. I want you to understand that before I tell you everything else, because everything else requires that foundation. 52 calls, 4 days, and my son, my only child, the boy I raised by myself after his father walked out when he was 9 years old. He never picked up once. His name is not important. I'll call him my son, because that's what he was to me, the whole center of my world for most of my adult life. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 of those years being his mother before anything else. I was a pediatric nurse for 26 years, which meant I worked nights and weekends and holidays, double shifts when the ward was short-staffed, and I never missed a single one of his baseball games. Not one. I drove 40 minutes each way to every practice, every tournament, every school performance. When he got into college on a partial scholarship, I picked up extra shifts for 2 years straight to cover the rest. I am telling you this not to ask for a medal, but because you need to understand what I was to him and what he chose over me. He was on a cruise. His 10th anniversary cruise, Caribbean itinerary, 7 nights on a ship with his wife and 8-year-old daughter. The ship had Wi-Fi. I know this because his wife posted about it. Patrice found the post while I was still in the ICU, still relearning how to form words on the left side of my mouth, still frightened in a way I had never been frightened in my life. Patrice is 67, retired from the Postal Service, sharp as anyone I've ever known. She has been my next-door neighbor for 11 years. She sat beside my hospital bed and showed me her phone because she thought I needed to know and because she was right. The first post was from the day after I fell. His wife at the ship's railing at sunset, hair blowing back, champagne flute raised, my son's arm around her waist. She'd written, "Finally unplugged. No calls, no emails, no drama. Just us and the ocean." My granddaughter was in the background, leaning over the railing to look at the water, ponytail flying. I stared at that photo for a long time. No drama. I read those words until they stopped meaning anything and then started meaning everything. Patrice scrolled down. There were more. My granddaughter at a pool, wearing floaties with little starfish on them, shrieking with laughter. My son and his wife at a formal dinner, dressed up, candlelight between them, smiling into the camera. Posts every single day, tagged with the ship's name and the ports they visited, time-stamped while I was lying in a bed 3 floors below the cardiac unit, relearning how to hold a cup. They had service. They were posting. They got the messages. I handed the phone back to Patrice and turned to face the window. Outside, the sky was doing that particular gray that late October does in the Midwest, heavy and low, like the ceiling of the world had dropped a little. I thought about the morning I fell. I had been making coffee. I remember the mug hitting the floor, that specific sound, ceramic on tile. I remember thinking, this is happening, this is real, and trying to get to the counter to hold myself up. I remember the floor coming up to meet me. I remember the cold of it. I had lain there for approximately 17 hours before Patrice came. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it matters. 17 hours alone on a kitchen floor with a brain bleed, 73 degrees in the house because I keep it cool, and not one person in my family wondering where I was. I closed my eyes. Patrice held my hand. Here is the thing about being a mother. You spend decades explaining your children to the world. You become their defense attorney, their spin doctor, their most loyal interpreter. My daughter-in-law was difficult. I had known this from early on. She was a woman who kept score in ways she never admitted to, who smiled warmly in public and grew cold the moment a door closed behind her. My son had always been susceptible to her moods. He was a gentle person, easily guilted, conflict-averse to the point of paralysis. I had watched her build a wall between him and me over 7 years of their marriage, brick by careful brick, and I had kept making excuses for both of them. She was stressed. They were busy. The baby years were hard. Now my granddaughter was in school, and things would settle. They'd find their rhythm. I was too available, too present, too much. I should call less. I should ask for less. I should be grateful for what I got. I had spent 3 years making myself smaller, and it had not worked. The visits grew shorter. My granddaughter's birthdays became events I attended for exactly 90 minutes before my daughter-in-law developed a headache or remembered a prior commitment. Last Thanksgiving, they told me 2 days before that they were doing something low-key, and I should make other plans. I spent that Thanksgiving with Patrice eating frozen lasagna and watching old movies, and I told myself it was fine. I understood. They needed space. Lying in that hospital bed, I stopped understanding. Patrice visited every day. She brought my mail, watered my plants, coordinated with the nursing staff. On day 3, she told me something that the head nurse on my floor had mentioned to her in passing, a small detail that lodged in my chest like a splinter. She said they'd called the emergency contact repeatedly, Patrice told me. And on day 2, someone from the contact number actually called back, just once, briefly. And when the nurse explained the situation, the call ended quickly. They said they'd look into travel arrangements, and then nothing. I sat with that for a moment. Someone called back. Once. Day 2, and then nothing for 2 more days. Nothing. So they knew. They had known since day 2. Whatever story my son told himself later about bad service and missed calls and being unreachable, the phone records would tell a different story. They had known I was in a hospital with a stroke, and they had chosen to finish the cruise. My son arrived on day 5, a Thursday afternoon. He came alone, without his wife, and without my granddaughter. He walked into my room with his coat still on, like he wasn't planning to stay long. And he had the look on his face that he always got when he'd done something he knew was wrong and had already prepared his defense. He sat down in the chair beside my bed and he said, "Mom, I am so sorry." The service was unbelievable out there. I looked at him. My son. Gray at the temples now, same eyes he'd had since birth, same way of rubbing the back of his neck when he was uncomfortable. 41 years old and still that 9-year-old boy in my mind underneath everything, the one who used to climb into my lap after nightmares and let me hold him until his breathing slowed. I said, "They called you 52 times. He rubbed the back of his neck. The ship's Wi-Fi was terrible. We barely had any signal. Your wife posted photos every day, tagged the location, responded to comments." He blinked. "I saw them," I said. Patrice showed me. The sunset photo was posted 18 hours after I was admitted. The pool day was posted while I was having my 3rd round of tests. She replied to 12 comments on the anniversary dinner photo while I was in speech therapy learning to make the letter S again. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. "I don't know what to say," he finally said. "You don't need to say anything right now," I told him. "I'm going to rest." He stayed 25 minutes. He left saying he'd come back the next day and bring my granddaughter. He did not come the next day. He texted instead, something about work catching up after the trip, a meeting he couldn't reschedule. He would come Saturday. Saturday became Sunday. Sunday became a phone call. I stopped waiting. And while I was stopping, I started paying attention to other things. The physical therapist on my floor was a young woman named Dara, 29 years old, methodical and kind. She had been working with me every day, and somewhere during our third session, she mentioned that she'd had a patient once who'd gone through something similar to me. A woman in her late 60s who'd been hospitalized and whose family had tried to use the hospitalization as grounds to establish guardianship. I asked her what she meant. She explained it carefully, the way people explain things they've watched cause damage, that sometimes when an older person has a significant medical event, family members move to petition for legal guardianship or conservatorship, using the event as evidence that the person can no longer manage their own affairs. It required establishing, on paper, that the person was incapacitated. Memory issues, confusion, inability to manage finances, inability to live safely alone. I thanked her, and then I went home, and I called my neighbor's daughter, who practices estate law 2 counties over, and I asked her to stop by. Patrice had picked me up from the hospital on a Wednesday. My son had not offered. I came home to a house that felt both familiar and different, the way everything feels when you've been frightened badly enough to lose your grip on the ordinary. Patrice had cleaned the kitchen. The mug I dropped was gone. There was soup in the refrigerator with a note taped to the lid in her handwriting. Heat on low, don't argue. I sat in my armchair and I opened my mail. Patrice had been collecting it, sorted into a neat stack. Bills on one side, everything else on the other. I went through the everything else pile slowly, the way you do when your left hand is still not entirely cooperating, and you've learned that rushing causes mistakes. Near the bottom was a large envelope I didn't recognize. Return address from a legal services firm in the city where my son lives, 40 minutes north of me. Addressed to me, but with a notation in the corner, Re. Peterson Family Matter. Conservatorship Inquiry. I opened it. Inside was a packet of papers. A petition. A draft of a petition for conservatorship of person and estate, my name in the designated field. My son's name listed as proposed conservator, his wife's name listed as co-petitioner. The petition cited a significant neurological event and demonstrated inability to manage independent living, and documented pattern of impaired judgment. There were supporting documents attached. A letter from someone I did not know, a physician whose name I did not recognize, who had apparently assessed my functional capacity based on reports from family members. I had never met this person. The letter described me as showing signs of cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. I have never been diagnosed with anything resembling dementia. My neurologist at the hospital had been explicit. The stroke had been serious. My recovery was going well. My cognitive function was intact. I had passed every assessment they ran. The second supporting document stopped my breath entirely. It was a statement from my son and his wife, handwritten, describing what they called a pattern of concerning behaviors over the preceding 18 months. I allegedly forgot appointments. I allegedly repeated stories. I allegedly became confused about dates and times. I allegedly left the stove on 3 times. I allegedly showed poor financial judgment and expressed paranoid concerns about family members. I allegedly called my son 15 to 20 times per week. Every single item was a fabrication. All of it. Not exaggerated. Not misinterpreted. Simply invented. At the bottom of the packet was a blank signature line with a note that said, "Please sign and return to authorize the conservatorship process. Alternatively, a court date will be scheduled." And attached to that, a financial disclosure form requesting a full accounting of my assets, my savings, my pension, my life insurance policy, the estimated value of my house. This is my house. I have owned it for 22 years. I paid off the mortgage 9 years ago. It is mine. My name is on every document. I chose every piece of furniture in it. I painted the kitchen that specific shade of yellow because I love it, and it makes me happy every single morning. And there was my son's name on a legal document, proposing to take all of it out of my hands. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a large envelope on a Wednesday afternoon, and you sit with it in your armchair, and the house is very quiet around you, and you think, so this is what it was. All of it. The pulling away, the shorter visits, the manufactured distance, all of it was preparation for this. I had become inconvenient. My house had not. I called Patrice. She came over in 10 minutes. She read through the packet and I watched her face, which is not a face that hides things well, and she put it down on the kitchen table and she said, "Dorothy, we need a lawyer. Today." Patrice's daughter, Renee, came that evening. She is thorough, unhurried, and one of those rare people who makes complicated things feel navigable without minimizing what they actually are. She read through everything twice. She asked me careful questions. She asked about my medical records, my financial accounts, my cognitive assessments from the hospital. She asked how long the petition had been drafted. I showed her the date on the documents. The petition had been drafted 11 days before I had my stroke, not after. Before. That changes things, Renee said quietly. They hadn't drafted this in response to my stroke. They had drafted it before, and then my stroke had happened, and they had looked at it as an opportunity. That was why my son had called back once from the ship and then gone silent. They were waiting, letting the medical situation build the case for them. A stroke, a hospitalization, a woman alone. It was exactly the narrative they needed. My son called me on a Friday, 11 days after I'd come home. His voice was careful, the way it got when he had been coached. He asked how I was feeling. He said he was worried about me. He said he thought I should consider my options regarding the house, maybe something more manageable, somewhere with support nearby. He knew of a community, lovely facility, really wonderful activities, people my age. He and his wife had visited it. He thought I'd love it. I said, "That's thoughtful of you." He relaxed slightly. I could hear it. "We just care about you," he said. "I know," I said. I had already spent 3 days with Renee. My will had been revised. A trust had been established for my granddaughter's education, locked until she turned 18, inaccessible to her parents for any purpose. The house was transferred to a living trust with specific language preventing any conservatorship claim without full judicial review and independent medical assessment. My medical power of attorney had been updated. The conservatorship petition from my son's firm had been responded to with a formal letter citing the pre-stroke drafting date, the fabricated medical assessment, and the fraudulent behavioral claims. Renee had also, on my behalf, requested that a welfare check be conducted regarding my granddaughter, just to establish a record just in case. I asked my son to come to my house the following Saturday. I told him I wanted to discuss some things in person. I said I'd been thinking about what he'd said, about options, about planning ahead. He agreed immediately. He said he'd bring his wife. I said that was fine. They arrived at 2 o'clock. His wife wore the particular expression she reserved for visits she considered obligatory, professionally pleasant, eyes already calculating. My son came in first and hugged me briefly, the way you hug someone when you're managing them. They sat on my couch. I sat in my armchair. Renee sat at my kitchen table, visible but quiet. They noticed her. "Who's that?" his wife asked. "My attorney," I said. The calculation in her eyes shifted. I put the conservatorship packet on the coffee table between us. I watched my son's face go still. "I want to understand this," I said. "Take your time." His wife spoke first, which did not surprise me. She said it came from a place of love. She said they'd been worried for a long time. She said the stroke had made it clear that I couldn't continue living alone indefinitely. She said the doctor's letter was from someone qualified, a consultant they'd engaged. She said the behavioral concerns were real, documented by both of them over an extended period. She said it was all done with my best interest in mind. I let her finish. Then I said, "This was drafted 11 days before my stroke. Did my best interests tell you I was going to have a stroke 11 days later?" Silence. "The physician listed here," I said, "has never met me. His letter is based on reports from the two of you. That is not a medical assessment. That is testimony from people with a financial interest in the outcome. Renee has flagged it to the state medical board." My son's wife looked at her husband. He was staring at the packet. "The behavioral log you submitted describes events that did not happen. I don't leave the stove on. I don't call you 15 times a week. I have phone records going back 2 years. Renee has copies." My son said very quietly, "Mom." "I'm not finished," I said. "You were on a cruise when I fell. You knew by day 2 that I was hospitalized. You received 17 messages. You finished the cruise. Then you sent a legal packet designed to take my house, my finances, and my right to make my own decisions. And now you're sitting here telling me it came from love." His wife started to say something. I held up my hand. "I want you to know that I understand exactly how this works," I said. "I was a nurse for 26 years. I have sat with families in these situations. I know what this packet means and what it was designed to do. I also want you to know that it will not work." Renee stood up from the kitchen table and came to stand beside my chair. She handed them a copy of my revised will, my trust documents, and the formal response to the conservatorship petition. She explained calmly, in the even tone of someone who does this professionally, that the petition had no legal merit, that any attempt to pursue it would be expensive, time-consuming, and based on fabricated evidence, and that proceeding would likely constitute elder financial abuse under state law. My daughter-in-law went very still. My son began to cry. I think the tears were real. I think he was genuinely ashamed. But shame after the fact is a different thing from the choice itself, and I had stopped filling in the space between those two things with forgiveness he hadn't asked for. I told him that I loved him. I meant it. I told him that I had loved him his entire life, and that nothing about that had changed. Then I told him that I was not going to sign those documents, not now, not ever. I told him that my granddaughter's trust was set and protected, and she would have money for college regardless of what happened between us. I told him that the house was mine and would remain mine. I told him that he needed to leave. His wife left without speaking. My son paused at the door. He said, "I didn't want it to go like this." I said, "I know, but you wanted something more than you didn't want this. Those aren't the same thing." The door closed. The house was quiet again. I sat in the stillness for a long time. The afternoon light came through the kitchen windows the way it does in late November, low and slanted and golden, and it fell across the kitchen table and Philip's old wooden chair that I'd kept because I couldn't bring myself to give it away, and it was ordinary and beautiful and mine. I thought about everything that had led to this room, this light, this moment. I thought about the year I worked double shifts to cover his college costs, and the night I sat alone beside my husband's hospice bed because my son said he needed one more day to arrange travel. I thought about the first Christmas after the divorce, just the two of us, him in his baseball pajamas eating cereal for breakfast at 9 years old, telling me it was the best Christmas he'd ever had because it was just us. I thought about how I had taken that little boy's love for granted, assumed it was permanent, assumed it would translate into the person he became. I thought about how wrong I had been and how long it had taken me to see it. Patrice came over that evening with wine and the kind of companionable silence that is its own form of care. We sat on my back porch in coats with the heat lamp going, and we didn't talk about any of it for a while. Eventually, she said, "How are you actually feeling?" I thought about it honestly. "Like something is over," I said. "Not like something ended. Like something that was already over finally stopped pretending." She nodded. She understood. "I want to see my granddaughter," I said. It was the one thing I couldn't resolve cleanly, the one knot that had no clean untangling. She was 8 years old. She had her father's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, and she had nothing to do with any of this. I'd been shut out of her daily life for so long that she was growing up in the gap between visits, and I missed her in a way that was different from all the other missing, quieter and more constant. Patrice said, "Leave that to me. I want to explain how that happened properly. because the video I analyzed had a gap in this part of the story, and I think it matters to fill it. Patrice had known my granddaughter since she was 3 years old, in the way that children know their parents' trusted neighbors, as a constant background presence. The woman who gave out good Halloween candy and had a ginger cat named Biscuit that my granddaughter had asked to pet approximately 500 times. When my granddaughter started 2nd grade this fall, her school was the same one that Patrice's other neighbor sent her twin boys to. Pickup overlap. Patrice had chatted with my daughter-in-law exactly twice in that parking lot. But she had my granddaughter's teacher's name. And teachers, when a grandparent calls on behalf of a child, when the circumstances are explained thoughtfully and without drama, sometimes facilitate things. Not official channels. Just a note sent home in a folder. Your grandmother is thinking about you. She would love to hear from you when you're ready. My granddaughter called me on a Sunday evening 3 weeks later. She used her father's phone, which meant he'd allowed it, which meant something in him was still working toward repair, even if he didn't know how to say so yet. She said, "Grandma, are you better?" I said, "I'm much better, sweetheart." She said, "Daddy said you were sick." I was, but I have a really good doctor and I do my exercises every day. "Grandma, can I come see you?" I looked around my kitchen, the yellow walls, the soup cooling on the stove, Patrice's ginger cat visible through the window in her yard. I thought about the kitchen table and how small a child looks sitting at it, and how much room there is for a coloring book and a cup of cocoa. "Yes," I said, "come whenever you're ready." She came on a Saturday in December. My son drove her. He walked her to the door and stood on the porch while she came inside. We didn't talk, my son and I, but he met my eyes and nodded, and I nodded back, and that was enough for now. My granddaughter came in carrying a backpack and immediately asked where Biscuit was. I told her next door. She said could she visit Biscuit after? I said yes. She took off her coat and sat down at the kitchen table and unzipped her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made this when you were in the hospital," she said. "Daddy forgot to give it to you. He said he forgot to give it to you. He said he forgot. But now I brought it myself." I unfolded it. Crayon on construction paper, a stick figure in a hospital bed, another stick figure with yellow curly hair standing next to it holding what appeared to be balloons. At the top, in careful 2nd grader handwriting, "Get better, Grandma. I love you so much." I held it together until she asked if she could have cocoa, and then I turned to the stove so she wouldn't see my face. I put that drawing on my refrigerator with a strawberry magnet right in the center where I see it every morning when I'm making coffee. It has been 5 months since the stroke. My recovery is what my neurologist calls textbook excellent, which made me laugh because after 26 years of nursing, I have read enough charts to know that textbook excellent is not guaranteed at 64. I walk 2 miles every morning. I do the hand exercises. I go to cardiac rehabilitation on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a group of women my age who have all survived something and who are all, in their various ways, rebuilding. We drink bad coffee afterward and complain about our children and laugh more than you would expect from a group of people who have all recently been frightened for their lives. My son called me last month. Not a managed call, not the careful tone he used when he was handling me. He called on a Sunday evening and he said, "Mom, I am sorry. Not about one thing. About all of it. About what she pushed me to do, and about the fact that I let her push me, and about not answering the phone, and about Philip's last week, and about Christmas, and about all of it. I know that's not enough, but I mean it. I listened. I believed him. I told him I heard him. I didn't tell him everything would be fine because I don't know that. I didn't take back the will or the trust or the legal protections because those exist for a reason that love doesn't automatically erase. I told him that I was open to rebuilding something, slowly, with honesty, and that the path back would be longer than one phone call, and that was okay. I told him my granddaughter was welcome anytime he wanted to bring her. He said he knew. He said she'd been asking to come back. There's a plane ticket on my kitchen counter. Portland, Oregon, first week of March. I've always wanted to see the Pacific coast. Those impossible cliffs over the water, the way the light looks out there in winter. My husband always said we'd go someday. Someday ran out. But mine didn't. I booked a window seat on a direct flight, a small hotel 2 blocks from the water, 4 days entirely for myself. I am 64 years old. I survived a stroke. I lost my son for a while and I am trying to find him again, carefully, with my eyes open this time. I gave my house back to myself. I kept my savings, my pension, my right to make my own decisions about my own life. What I've learned at 64 is that loving someone does not mean allowing them to erase you. It does not mean that you must make yourself smaller and smaller until there is nothing left to love. I spent too many years believing that my value to my family was contingent on my convenience. That if I asked for less, needed less, called less, showed up less, they would finally be comfortable enough to let me in. I was wrong. The people who want you in their lives will find room, and the people who don't will move the furniture no matter how small you make yourself. Patrice called this morning to tell me Biscuit knocked over her entire plant shelf and she needs help repotting things this afternoon. I told her I'd be over after my walk. There are worse things at 64 than your neighbor needing you. There are worse things than a granddaughter who calls on Sundays now, reliably, without being asked. There are worse things than a table with room for a coloring book and a cup of cocoa and a child with her father's eyes who says, matter-of-factly, "Grandma, this is my favorite place to be." I have stopped waiting to be chosen by people who are still deciding. I have started choosing myself instead. It turns out I am very good company. I just needed to stop leaving the room to prove it. If this story reached something in you, if you've been that woman on the gurney waiting for a phone that doesn't ring, or that mother explaining your child's absences to everyone including yourself, I want you to know you are not too old to change the terms. You are not too old to put your name first on a legal document. You are not too old to book a window seat to somewhere beautiful and go alone and be fine. The people who love you truly will still be there when you land. And the ones who won't be, you are already carrying them by yourself anyway. I'm not asking you to be angry. Anger is exhausting and I'm done being tired. I'm asking you to be clear. Clear about what you will accept and what you won't. Clear about what you will accept and what you won't. Clear about who shows up and who sends excuses. Clear about the difference between someone who loves you and someone who is managing their guilt about not loving you enough. There's a drawing on my refrigerator that says, "I love you so much" in second-grade handwriting. Patrice's cat is visible through my kitchen window. My plane leaves in 11 days. The coffee is hot and the morning light is doing that thing it does in January, slanted and silver and clean. I am 64 years old and I am just getting started. And if my story helps one person understand that the life waiting for you on the other side of stopping shrinking yourself is worth every difficult thing it takes to get there, then everything was worth it. Every single bit.